Welcome to a new edition of Gerety Talks, the award that brings together some of the greatest creative leaders each year to look at work from a powerful perspective. Today, we are very happy to talk with Zoe Edwards, Principal Consultant Strategy and Planning, and Melissa Smith, Managing Director and Founder at the Industry Club, one of our supporters and sponsors this year. The Industry Club is a creative communications sector's dedicated recruitment partner and training provider that for over a decade has worked with some of the biggest names in the industry, helping them connect the dots and elevate their potential. Founded in 2011 by Melissa Smith, a group of unstereotypical recruiters, female-founded, with an all-female team, and with deep agency experience and long-standing recruitment expertise. Welcome and thanks for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Hi, Lucia. Thanks for having us.
Let's start by a little intro. Tell us a little bit more about your specific roles and what the Industry Club does.
Sure. I'll as you've introduced me as MD and founder, I'll pop in first on that one, Lucia. Thanks for talking to us today. It's really good to be part of a Gerety talk. We watch lots of them and do lots of social for you guys on the talk, so it's really good to be part of one. And as you mentioned, I founded the Industry Club 13 years ago. And my background before that was in creative operations in agencies. So I've kind of carried that job skill through, if you like, as MD at the Industry Club. And I work with our wider team developing our talent solutions. So we're basically all about the people in creative organizations. That includes areas like mapping future skill requirements, supporting restructures. We're doing quite a lot of that work at the moment. And upskilling people with our training that you mentioned as well, our CPD professional development programs, or obviously recruiting new hires as well. So that's really what the Industry Club is all about.
And I am responsible for, as you said, Lucia, the strategy and planning division within the Industry Club. So like Melissa, I've come from an agency background. I've worked at agencies like BCCP and Publicis. I was a business director. And then I joined the Industry Club about 8 years ago. And I now look after strategists and planners, all shapes and sizes, from junior roles up to leadership roles. And we work with creative agencies and direct brands in-house. In addition to that, I also lead on all the marketing and the partnerships for the Industry Club. So just like the partnership with Gerety Awards.
And your website reads, as a team with deep agency experience, having worked across the industry for many agencies, we know exactly how the industry works and how we can help. What are today the biggest challenges you face both locally in the UK and abroad?
The biggest challenges, I mean, I think probably in the UK, I'd say that the economic uncertainty that has happened since COVID, since the last year or two, has been really challenging. And what we've found is that brands are really cautious with their budgets, and that puts huge pressure on agencies to deliver more for less. And we've seen that in terms of agencies have made lots of redundancies. They haven't been able to grow how they'd like to. So it's been a challenging year for most of the agencies that we work with. I think that's also had a huge knock-on effect on another big challenge in the UK, and that's about diversity, and the diversity of the teams that are hired within agencies. Obviously, it's a hot topic and there's been progress that's been made, and lots of agencies are brilliant at bringing in more diverse talent at grassroots level. But one of the areas I think it's more than just entry level roles. And one of the areas that I think is a lot of work still to be done is the more mature of us within agencies. There's a lot of things about at the moment about we're working for a lot longer throughout our lives, and agencies always seem to have favoured youth over experience. There was a really interesting thing in the press in the UK this week where there was a statistic saying that just under half of recruiters thought someone aged 57 was too old to hire, which is shocking because we've got a lot more time to work within us. So I'm hoping something that will be something that hopefully will agencies will start dealing with a little bit more in the future. And then I also think probably in the UK, we're quite guilty of being London centric, and London being the center of the universe. And we need to broaden the scope to attract talent from elsewhere in the country and also globally. Melissa, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with all of that. I mean, the ageism thing is super interesting and certainly creates quite a challenge for us in the recruitment area for sure. I think technology as well. I mean, you know, the elephant in the room, AI, everyone's talking about it. It is the hot topic. But I think just maintaining creativity in what's an ever increasing tech-driven environment, and the adoption of AI in the creative process. You know, lots of work is being offshored, and really the challenge is maintaining that creativity, you know, globally in an ever kind of tech-driven environment. What I've been noticing recently, as far as AI goes, is that there's quite a challenge for the smaller agencies or the less technologically, that's not easy to say, advanced agencies, because the global networks have obviously invested heavily in their own tools and training and building governance into those tools, whereas the smaller or less advanced agencies are frankly late adopters or even in denial about, you know, how AI is going to completely change how we work in the creative industries. We actually ran a workshop. We've added an AI workshop to the industry school, and we ran our first one of those a few weeks ago, and I was genuinely surprised at how many of the attendees had no prior knowledge or were not using any tools whatsoever. So I think there is quite a divide between kind of big networks who can invest very heavily, like the Publicis with Marcel, etc., and the kind of smaller shops. So I think that is going to be something that we need to really look out for, and is going to be a challenge. And from a talent point of view, you know, we're going to be seeing new skills added to existing roles because of AI, and also a lot of new roles being created, you know, with the emergence of AI. We're already getting, you know, new roles through that are specifically tailored towards, you know, understanding and prompting AI, for example. So I think that is going to be a challenge that we really need to watch, and that will evolve over 2025 for sure.
Roles that maybe don't yet exist, right?
100%. Yeah.
Okay, and you spoke about talent and the creative industries. What do you think is today a key trait to succeed in the creative industries, other than how learning about AI?
Other than that, well, I mean, that's very much part of it. I mean, I think for me, I'd probably say adaptability and resilience. I think the resilience comes back to the fact that we've been in quite a challenging period of time for a few years. And adaptability is because things are moving so quickly at such fast pace. The industry is constantly changing. There's new technologies like AI. Clients, though, are evolving what they want from agencies. And they're changing the way that they organize their agency structures around them. Things like in-housing, for example, has a huge impact. I think, and this probably goes beyond just the creative industry, but those who are most successful are those are the ones that can stay ahead of these changes, and they can continue to push and drive creatively. Creatively, I can't speak. So I think that's probably the biggest issue.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, curiosity, I think, is what I'm always looking for in candidates. And when, you know, I was working in an agency, I always wanted to make sure that anyone I hired was super curious, because if you're curious, you're going to adapt and keep ahead of things. And, you know, it's just one of those traits that I would definitely be looking for in anyone that I was hiring, basically, for my own business or anyone else's.
And how do you go about finding the best possible candidate? What things do you take into consideration when trying to find the perfect match?
It's a good question. I think it's something we should be very good at. It's about understanding both the technical and the cultural fit. I think obviously there are certain skills that hiring managers are looking for, which we need to deliver on. But really, it's also seeing about that cultural fit and seeing whether someone kind of embodies an agency or a brand's values and what their goals are. And that's what differentiates, I think, just kind of an on-paper CV through the way that we meet people and we really try and sort of deeply understand what their drivers are, what their motivations for, what they believe in, what their view on the world is, and that makes a real difference. We also try to really sort of deep dive into candidates' potential. It's really easy just to find someone who's worked in one above the line agency and put them into a different above the line agency. I think what's really much more challenging and much more interesting is finding someone from a different space and what's transferable, and then bringing them into somewhere where they'll be really set up for success within an organization. And that's what I think makes a real difference and where we can add value.
Yeah, I completely agree. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe when doing your job, you even see things that the candidate doesn't even think he or she is possible of doing or carrying on, right? That's interesting.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And sometimes you're talking to someone and you've gone through all the pieces of work they've worked on before, but actually the interesting thing is something they do as a side hustle or in their personal lives, which really makes them different to another candidate. And that's what I find really fascinating.
That's why it's important to add the hobby as well. What we used to put in our CVs in the old days, like hobbies.
If people don't put that, that's what I always ask about as well.
We do have some clients that ask for star signs. We stop there. We're like, no, we don't think star signs are really that relevant.
And most of the team has experience working in agencies. How does this help in your task, and how having been on the other side helpful?
I mean, I like to think that it massively changes the way I am as a recruiter. I mean, I not only do I have empathy with a hiring manager because I was in that role myself, but I also understand the pressures that they are under from clients internally. So I think that just means that when I get a brief and I understand what their kind of challenge is, I'm just really, really empathetic and really able to kind of move quickly and try and ease their pain points, because I've done that job myself and I've hired for my team myself when I was a business director.
Yeah, I agree. Exactly the same in that I did a lot of hiring, in my role in creative operations, and I also did a lot of hiring across a lot of different departments, be it operations, creative, project management. So I think we also are able to grasp culture quite quickly, even though it may not be the culture of a business that we've worked in. I think we really recognize the culture of business and can really get under the skin of that quite quickly. And I just think it is really, really useful having worked both sides of the fence, as Zoe said, particularly if you've been in that hiring role. I mean, I've met some people that work in recruitment who can get very frustrated at the lack of feedback or the lack of time that a hiring manager will spend with them. But it's probably only 5% of that hiring person's role, so you've got to understand that the other 95% is them doing a completely different role. So I think it is super useful having worked, in an agency and experiencing that yourself, basically. Yeah.
I think as well, I mean, I'm genuinely interested and passionate about creative work. It's my favorite bit of the job when I was a business director was sitting in a creative whip and seeing the ideas come from creative teams and helping build that. I can't imagine being a recruiter in any other industry. It's what I love and it's what we really enjoy doing. I think that makes a massive difference.
And Melissa, you mentioned at the beginning you have celebrated your 13th anniversary this year, and you've also announced that you are now an employee-owned business. What does this mean to you and all the team involved?
Well, that's an interesting question, and it'll be interesting to find out how many people that are listening to this actually understand what an employee-owned business is, because it's not a very well recognized business concept at the moment. And just because of that, it's been quite an interesting and I'd say educational journey for me as the founder and for the team who are now all co-owners of the business. So what does this mean to me and the team? Well, for me personally, I will continue to run the business for a few years yet. But now we talk about our growth and succession plans much more with the wider team, which I think is a really healthy way to run an inclusive business, really. And Zoe's been very involved in this journey as well. So I'm sure she has a similar but maybe a different perspective on it.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you'd asked me when I joined 8 years ago, like, would I want to set up my own recruitment business? That probably wouldn't have been the first thing that I would have thought of doing. I probably would have been too fearful to even think I could do something like that. I've seen how hard Melissa's worked over the last 8 years I've worked with her. It's tough to run your own business. But I think what this opportunity has given us, and each of us there, is the opportunity to start shaping the business going forward. And it's given all of us really long-term security and leadership opportunities that we might never have had before. And rather than starting from scratch myself, we've got the opportunity to co-own a really successful, well-established, well-known business, and hopefully take what Melissa's done so brilliantly and take it on further and further. That's the ambition, which is really exciting.
And you have actually created a series of articles on this topic, Cure EO City series, where you explore the rise of employee ownership, EO, in the creative industry. Actually, when preparing for the interview, I wasn't very sure what we were talking about. So as you said, Melissa, not everybody knows about this. What are your biggest findings on this?
Well, firstly, there's a real sense of community among the businesses who become employee owned, because as I said earlier, it's actually not a new concept. I think it's been around for 6 or 8 years. It's definitely grown in popularity over the last few years. I think it's gone from something like 1,600 EO businesses to 3,500 in the last 2 years. So that shows you how much it has grown. But I guess the two key findings for us is that EO is not for everyone. There needs to be a kind of real transparency and trust within the business, which we had a lot of that already. You know, we are a small team where there's 11 of us in total. So just by nature of being a small team, there has to be a good level of trust, and there certainly is a lot of transparency. But sorry, motorbike in the background there. But when that does happen, all of the EO businesses that we've spoken to do say that there's definitely a direct correlation with kind of financial success and longevity. So yeah, I would say they are the two key findings.
And Zoe, you also recently held a roundtable on the evolving role of strategies for in-house agencies. Can you share with us some of the takes and findings on this topic?
Of course. I mean, this is one of the things I love, is actually getting to talk to strategists in-house about their day-to-day, about how they find things within the agency or the brand they're working for. So this was a really nice opportunity. We had about, I think, 10 strategists from different brands and really well-known global brands. It was all under enclosed doors, so it wasn't something where I could actually reveal which strategists they were. But it enabled us to kind of, and I guess it enabled them to really share, because often they are the only strategist working in a brand and they're not part of a big strategy team. So they were able to share with each other their different experiences and how they varied, the challenges and the opportunities. There were probably kind of 4 things which I took away from it that I thought were most interesting. I think one was, there was a really common theme about how important it is for a creative strategist to demonstrate the value of creative strategy, particularly to marketing leads who are, by the nature of what they do, very strategic, understand their brand, understand the commercials, and perhaps are a little bit I'm not quite sure what the value add is there. So there was a real clear kind of education role that strategists have when they go in-house. That was a common theme. I think quite a few strategists also like the idea of going in-house to get more upstream and to deal with product and marketing strategy versus just comms, for example, And what was quite clear is you don't really have license to do that until you've gone and done the bread and butter well. And that's something you get invited to do over time. Another point that we found, which ties back a little bit to what I was talking about to do with ageism within agencies, what was really promising is that in-house agency teams are often more senior, more mature, more experienced. And that was very attractive to everyone in the room that we spoke to. And I think some of that is because you need to have those experienced people proving the value of strategy. But also there just seemed to be less of a fixation on youth, more of a focus on experience, which was really promising. We found that a lot of agency strategists move because they think there will be a better work-life balance, because agencies have a pretty terrible reputation. And that is sometimes the case, not always the case. I don't think the grass is always greener. And certain brands, I think, work everyone very, very hard. But I think one of the things I hadn't really thought about is that things like career progression in-house can be harder. There are less obvious routes to the next level up. For example, in an agency, a strategy director might work to a partner, then might work to a head of planning. Within in-house brands, often progress is sideways rather than upwards. So those more junior people perhaps might get a bit frustrated because there is no promotion, because there is nowhere for them to go. So that was quite interesting. And then I think the last thing was, there's always been, I think, you might have found this from talking to creatives before, a little nervousness that if you go in-house and work for one brand, there's not the diversity and the breadth and maybe the excitement that you have when you work in an agency. And what seemed really interesting is that there are definitely initiatives that have been put in place in some in-house brands to ensure that they still are able to get that. So things like putting yourself out there and becoming an Effie's judge, so you get to see more creative work than just the brands you're working for.
Okay.
Which was, I think, is really important, because you don't want to suddenly become in a silo and only live and breathe one brand. I think as well, there was one of the brands we spoke to actually offered an exchange program with another brand, obviously not a competitor brand, but a broadcast brand, for example, a strategist there going and visiting an FMCG brand and ensuring that they shared learnings. So that kind of idea about continually adapting and learning, there are definitely ways that in-house agencies are starting to embrace that, which I think is really vital.
And speaking about learning, you have also built what you call your training arm, the industry school that you mentioned before, using your extensive experience and incredible industry network. And it's your effort to get back to the industry you love and your way of contributing to its future. So tell us a little bit more about what the industry school does.
Yeah, I'll take that one, Lucia, because I'm very involved in the industry school. But I think, as you've alluded to today, future-proofing creative businesses is really critical, and staff training is obviously a big part of that. Although what we have seen, during the pandemic, agencies were staffing up really rapidly and spending their money on salaries and staffing, and actually, because everyone was so busy in those 2 years after the pandemic as well, staff training really fell a little bit to one side, professional development. What we've seen is a rise in training budgets actually in the last 12 months, I would say, where potentially from a benefit point of view, businesses are starting to recognize that actually professional development is a really big part, a good draw for candidates coming into businesses. And we know that from our candidates that professional development is a key consideration when they're choosing an employer, particularly that kind of junior to mid-range, where career development is really, really important. So investing in training, super important for employers. At the Industry Club, we develop CPD certified workshops. So if a company has a CPD program, all of our workshops count towards that CPD certification. and they're delivered by senior people who still work in the industry. They're senior people who are native, or they're experts from a marketing or technology field. So, for example, our AI workshop is actually taken by a guy that was a photographer and is an absolute expert in all of the AI tools and ways of working. And we introduced that workshop last month, actually, and that's been incredibly popular. But we also focus on actually quite practical workshops as well, real practical skills for people in marketing. And I think a really good example of that is our understanding agency finance and forecasting workshop. I always get that one wrong. Understanding agency finance and forecast planning is what it's called. Because actually, in these really kind of economical, challenging times, as Zoe mentioned earlier, I personally feel it's super important more than ever that everyone understands how their company makes money, how their agency makes money, and it's again, it's quite interesting to find that a lot of people, maybe 60 to 75% of people that are working in an agency don't actually understand how the company makes the money, So we teach some really good practical skills like that as well. And we do open workshops and we do in-house workshops as well. And this year in particular, we found that agencies definitely are much more open to investing, their budgets in training, in particular in-house training as well. So yeah, that's the industry school basically.
And you have partnered with Just One Tree to help combat climate change together. Can you tell us about them and this partnership?
I'll take that one as well, Zoe, if that's okay. Yeah, so Just One Tree. I mean, lots of businesses are using tree planting companies, I think, to help combat, CO2 emissions. And we chose Just One Tree because they're not only looking to do CO2 emissions, but they're really looking at biodiversity in the main as well. You can see I'm a big tree fan. I won't show you around the rest of the room, but it's pretty much, I am covered in plants. I absolutely love the natural world. So for me, in terms of our kind of social, giving back platform for us, planting trees was a natural one to focus on. But I also love Just One Tree Story because Amanda Bronkhurst, who is their CEO and founder, actually was a producer. So she did a similar job to all the kind of people that we talk to on a daily basis. And during the pandemic, when there was very little work around, if any, she founded Just One Tree and has now made that. She's dedicated 100% of her time to that cause now. So I love Amanda's story, and if you get a chance to check out Just One Tree, please do, because they're absolutely brilliant. And the way that we make it work is we're now inviting our clients to help grow our company forest. So every time a new client joins us, we plant 5 trees, and then we keep on planting trees for every new job and every placement. So yeah, we've got
That's cool.
quite a forest so far. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah, that's super cool. And what projects are you working on that you can tell us about? Zoe, I know you wanted to talk about that from the beginning.
Oh, well, I mean, I think so. I mean, I've talked a little bit about in-house agencies throughout our chat today. It's such a growing area. It is one of the areas where we're seeing massive growth. And so many of our candidates who I talk to, some of the best, want to go in-house. So it's just been a natural space for us to grow. I guess the exciting thing we're doing, which should be coming out in the next couple of weeks, is we've launched the first ever in the UK, certainly, in-house agency salary survey. And that's sort of come through working with a partnership with an organization called the In-House Agency Leaders Club, which has members from all of the brands, I think probably about 70 brands in the UK. So that's really exciting. We can't reveal any of the results yet, but there is a breakfast meeting, and then there'll be an online PDF sharing all the results of the survey. So that's exciting. And then in addition to that as well, I've always looked after planning and strategy. But myself and one of my other colleagues, Annie, are starting to grow our data service offering. So I'm looking after things like looking for data planners now. Annie is looking after data analysts. And that's really come from the fact that the agencies we work with and the brands have always found it tricky to find data strategists and data analysts. And to our kind of point we mentioned a little bit earlier on about how we match skills and cultures, I think one of the things we're really good at doing is finding those people in data who work well within agencies because they're good at storytelling. So that's a new area for us, but I think a really important area that we're seeing growing quite rapidly. Melissa,
And the last, sorry.
I'm going to add to that.
No.
Yeah.
So a last question to wrap up. What are your hopes and plans for the future of the Industry Club?
Oh, it's a big question. So I think most people in agencies will say it's been a challenging year, but we really are starting to see sort of more signs of optimism. We're seeing more pitches happening, more marketing budgets been spent. And I think hopefully post-elections and with the new year, we'll see much needed growth within agencies. So that's really exciting. I think we will continue to grow our in-house offering and work with more and more brands. And again, that's a kind of really interesting space for us. And I think also just hopefully things like the Gerety partnership you did with you. I know you've got all the talks coming up again later on this year. Just being able to kind of stay in touch and closer to agencies and creatives and understand kind of what challenges they're facing and what they're excited about is really key. A year or two ago, it was really hard to meet people in real life. And I think what I'm really enjoying and what I'm seeing happening more and more is going into agencies, meeting people on a Wednesday afternoon and just spending that time with them, which we haven't been able to do immediately post-COVID. So that excites me.
Yeah, and I think just to, how are we going to keep up with that? How are we going to, with all the things that Zoe has talked about in terms of our clients' growth, we hope to grow and diversify into new areas of training and talent solutions for our clients. So a really good example of that is what I've seen in the back end of this year is a lot of clients coming to us and asking us to help them restructure, like do organizational restructures. So things like staff assessments, in-house training, and then mapping potential future hires as well. So I think from how we hope to grow and diversify is that we want to just become have a much more holistic approach for our clients. One size doesn't fit all. It's not necessarily they'll come to us just for some training or to hire someone new. What we want to do is kind of grow our offering to something much more holistic. As hiring trends change, we need to change with that basically. So yeah.
Cool. Well, thank you so much for sharing this time with us. And it was very interesting to find out more about the Industry Club and your plans and projects. And thanks for being a Gerety supporter, and hope to hear more from you in the future.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Bye.